Welcome to Head Change, the podcast that puts you in a better headspace. I'm your host, Levi Strom. Transcripts of today's episode are brought to you thanks to a generous donation from Deborah Lumpkin's studio, sustainable Gyutaku artist in Maui, Hawaii. Thank you, Deborah. Additional funding provided by Jeannie Nosaro of Bee Haven Hill Farms in Mendocino, California. On today's episode, I speak with Lorne Silverstein about finding your way in the cannabis industry. Thanks for coming on. I'd love to just hear about your connection to the plant, because I know you do so much on the business side, but I kind of want to hear more about, like, how did you go from an East Coast attorney to a West Coast consultant in the cannabis industry? How did that happen?
Well, there were some stepping stones between those things. So in 2005, moved out to the West Coast with my wife and kids at the time, and settled in a beautiful, beautiful community in Davis called Village Homes. Sustainable living, one of the models in the country, and really came to the West Coast to connect to the earth, to be outside, to live a healthier lifestyle, really, from the East Coast, and also reduce stress and sort of a reset, a little bit of a reset. In doing so, came out, was thinking about practicing law actively, and through a bunch of different things that took place, decided not to, but had also been working to form a company in the medical diagnostics industry, which is about in vitro diagnostic assay testing. So testing for different infectious disease, you name it, whether it be Lyme disease or Crohn's disease. So did that, and in doing that, did a lot of regulatory work, 510K medical device work, and handled a lot of different parts of that business, and starting off as chief operating officer and sales director and legal and regulatory. I got a call about 2011, 2012, I believe, out of Las Vegas, some people that I knew, and they were looking to get in on the licensure, different licenses that were opening up in Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is. And flew down there, met with a group of people from all walks of life. It was pretty wild. It was Wild Wild West time, and that was my first foray into the cannabis industry, in helping raise money, in putting together a team, putting together 3 different applications, with 12 copies, and just working nonstop to get that in. And so that was my first time that I entered the industry, not really knowing what I was doing, and worked with some nice companies at the time. Edipure, which was I think the first licensed edible manufacturing company in Colorado. And so we worked a lot of high ranking governmental officials, and so it really was my entry and sort of whetting my appetite towards eventually becoming the CEO of Integrate Count Community Partners, which was a small consulting firm out of Davis. My connection to the plant, being somebody who used cannabis or marijuana for years, recreationally. I really, as I moved into the industry, and even before so, knew of the incredible medicinal value of the plant, especially towards sleep, anti-anxiety. And in getting into the industry, I have found myself, as I have continued to work with groups, whether bigger or smaller, I gravitate towards the small and medium-sized folks, especially the cultivators, which is, should have by name, but why I love working with the green chalk folks, and folks like yourself, and people who really, as I like to say, care about the green not the green.
Right.
And have taken their time, both pre-Prop 215, post 215, the brave new world that we're living in now, to fight the good fight. To go from hiding and growing in the hills to the activism to now the advocacy for something that really was marginalized by big business for so long. And so that struggle is something that really pulls me towards the plant, and just knowing that we're at the tip of the iceberg in what we know, or at least research wise, the benefits of this amazing plant.
Yeah. I mean, we are at the tip of the iceberg, and yeah, I love that you're gravitating towards I think the cultivators in California, as you know, they're coming from, we're daylighting a black market industry overnight. And some of the best talent, some of the best genetics, some of the best craftsmen don't know how to scale their brand. They don't even know how to start a brand. They probably struggle with jumping through all the hoops of licensing. And I think it's so important to have people like you that have a legal background or a business background, that are good communicators, that can take a deep breath, and write the letter, communicate with the bureaucracy, which can be just so mind numbing, especially when you're like a pot grower, and then you butt up against a regulatory power like the state of California, which anybody that lives in California can take a big sigh with me about the taxes in this state and how hard it is to run a business in this state. And you take some people that have literally been kind of off the map, really kind of a counterculture, and people that I think like you came here, you said you moved from the East Coast to the West Coast to pursue a healthier lifestyle and a connection to the earth. And I think that's what the Emerald Triangle represents, is a lot of people did that. A lot of people left the corporate world, their day jobs, and they were seeking a different life in Northern California through this plant. And now this plant is becoming, it's the fastest growing industry in America. And I think a lot of people are confused. They don't know what's going on. And we really need people to come into the space that have the ability to say, hey guys, this is what I see. I recognize the patterns going on here. I can see the big picture. We got to start thinking big picture. And, the conversations we've had, I think a lot of people like me with small brands or small growers, we're just trying to get to tomorrow, right? We're trying to pay the bills. We're trying to pay payroll. We're trying to make sure we get seeds in the ground, product on the shelf. We oftentimes can only think about the next day rather than the next year, the 5-year strategy. So in working with, what do you see right now as the biggest challenge facing the California cannabis operator? What is the single, with all the people you work with, do you see a kind of a common, this is where people need help? This is where I know I can be helpful. If anybody listening, is thinking about starting a cannabis business, or thinking about entering the space, what is going to be, the number one obstacle in your mind that you see people entering this space, or people that are kind of in my position, they're trying to get to the next step? Where do we need to be putting our energy? What advice can you have for people to help us make some sense out of what is really a pretty chaotic scene right now, with the regulations being in constant fluctuation, Canadian money pouring in? Where do you see this going? Because Lorne, I think you have probably a better picture of the big picture than anybody that I know.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't, I'm sure my view is one view. It's a huge question you just asked.
It is, and we can break it down.
yeah, no worries.
Take a bite-sized piece of that question.
Right. Look, I think in my work that I do, and the same thing is in being an attorney, and really I look at myself as a consultant who happens to be an attorney, and that all those terms can be very loose in this space. But the reality is all I'm trying to bring to the table is an ability to facilitate discussion and movement towards what the small, medium-sized grower, the small, medium-sized person in this industry, or company in this industry, needs to do to be successful. And being successful, like you said, means day to day, making it to the next day, putting seeds in the ground. Where are they going? Who's going to handle distribution? Movement towards vertical integration, putting together SOPs, operating plans, business plans, structuring companies. And I think one of the biggest obstacles that the smalls and mediums have is that they don't have the infrastructure to support what they want to do,
right,
and to work at a level of multiple 10,000 square foot farms outdoor, where you're only, unless you're auto flowering, getting one turn. So you got to nail it,
right.
and you got to hope that you're not getting hit with fire, and you got to hope you're not getting hit with rain, and you got to hope that otherwise you're gone, and the margins are so slim with all of the fees and the taxation and everything and everybody, and if you're not vertically integrated, the manufacturer taking a huge chunk, or the distributor taking 20%. By the time you finish, you're looking at fees and rates sometimes 60 or 70% of the gross. So I think that the biggest challenge to the industry is yes, regulations are all over the place. They're going to continue to change. Hopefully, what we continue to do is what we've done, and setting up nonprofits to advocate, different coalitions, associations, continuing to be active locally, nationally, statewide. Really is that we have to dial in a way to support each other, so that we can set up the proper infrastructure to sustain, to weather the storm, so to speak. And like you said, big Canadian money, big business, big ag, in anything where there's money to be made, you're going to see this thing, move towards big box.
Right.
So how do you deal with that? And to me, is to, carve out a niche, do what you do well, stay in that lane, continue to forge the relationships you need. But it is, when we, because of the fact that we're hamstrung in so many ways, through taxation, through permitting, through licensing, through oversight, through banking, the challenges are huge. The obstacles are huge. And so it's that much more important to really understand the profit and loss, and how do you work with OSHA and workers' comp, and how, if we don't do that and we do things the old way, we struggle along the old way. And while I think there's a pining for that, kind of simplicity to that,
Mm-hmm.
it takes the very diligent, committed, dedicated person in this industry to stick with what their guns, what they're doing, what they believe in, and not selling out. And it just, to me, it takes a lot of work. I think it takes a heck of a lot of commitment. It takes a certain level of stupidity, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Right. Sure.
It and to anybody listening to that, I'm sure they're laughing and shaking their head, because there are times that you wonder, after you've sent a huge amount of product to a manufacturer, and then they come back with the numbers, and after they take out their fees and everything else, and you look at the numbers and you're like, well, what? Because you're growing what you believe to be, in some cases, Emerald Cup award winning cannabis, and you're not seeing the return on what you're growing, right? But everybody else is getting it. Like I always say, the cultivator is always the last person to make money here, just like it is with coffee beans, or just like it is in any other trade. But it's the dealer on the street in Detroit or Baltimore or wherever that's making the money, or in Humboldt selling bags of weed out of his truck.
Right.
So,
yeah, what a different game. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when you grew a pound of weed, and you had your medical recommendation, and you went to a medical shop in California and you sold them your weed, and they gave you cash, and that was the transaction. Now it's a completely different relationship. You can't do that. And there's multiple middlemen that are taking cuts, the manufacturer, like you said, the distributor. And there's a lot of people. I think when legalization happened and I fell into this camp, I think most people did. We all expected this 10x. We thought, well, whatever our revenue was from 2017, get ready because it's going to be 10x. So let's start scaling up. So people got their licenses. They grew a ton of pot. They made a ton of they bought a ton of packaging. They did all this stuff. And then whether it was the regulations, the black market, wherever you want to point the finger, and I think it's multifaceted, that 10x return didn't happen. In fact, the industry really kind of stagnated. I think some brands have done well, but most of the small to mid-sized operators that I think you and I talk to are really struggling right now. In fact, there's barely any left. I mean, there's been a mass extinction of brands. If you go back to pre-Prop 64, 90% of those brands are gone. And then every year it seems like those legacy brands are becoming increasingly rare. I mean, a brand like mine or Green Shock that's been around for at least 5 years is becoming really, really rare. And trying to herd cats, right? And get everybody on the same page, I think really is oftentimes the hardest part, because if you come from a pedigree of, I went to Anderson School of Business and I have an MBA and I'm talking to somebody who is a CFO, you kind of understand how to mitigate the risks and how to set up business structure that is, I guess, that's tried and true. But when you're a small operator, you don't know what those business plans even look like to begin with. I mean, this is where I really struggle. It's like, I know all these great people I'd love to work with, but how do I go to them and say, here's my joint venture proposal? Like, I need somebody to help with that. That's why the consultant is so important. But there's a lot of bad consultants in any industry. And I think there's a lot of really predatory people that pick on the cannabis industry, whether you're an attorney, a bookkeeper, whoever you are. There's always the cannabis rate, right? It's like, maybe your normal rate's $200 an hour. Oh, it's a cannabis brand. Now it's $600 an hour. And that is what makes it. And I know you don't do that. And I know a lot of people are really fair and are actually trying to help the space and have their skin in the game. But there's a lot of people that are really just preying on the industry, and especially investors. So a lot of us that are kind of coming from, the backwoods and coming out into the daylight, out into the full sun, have kind of seen this first wave of green rushers and gotten really turned off. It's like a lot of the super talkers and the people promising you the world. And then when it comes time to actually show up for work, they're nowhere to be found. And I've seen that over and over and over. And I'm not going to mention names, I'm not here to badmouth people, but I think anybody that's been in the space knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so finding the right consultants, finding the right attorneys, when you're a small brand, a bootstrap brand, one wrong relationship can do you in sometimes. I love what you said though about the stupidity, and I think that's true for any business. Business is hard. Being an entrepreneur is a fool's errand. It is a huge gamble. We do it for the passion. Anybody that's still around in this space is doing it because they're passionate about the plant and they really believe in it. But from a business point of view, it might be kind of stupid right now.
Yeah.
I think long term it's not. And I think the brands that can make it out of California will be the next Kellogg's of the world. I mean, I think there's this massive potential coming out of California, but the regulations are going to continue to kind of hamper that. And what are your thoughts on the black market? Do you think the black market is a real threat, or is there a way to bring these people into the fold? What is your perspective on how we deal with the black market in California? Because the black market is huge right now.
Sure. Listen, I think that, of course, the black market is huge. I mean, here's the rub. As we were working early with the state of California, local jurisdictions, local counties, whether it's Sacramento, Yolo, Humboldt, Trinity, it doesn't matter. We were combating these groups and these companies that were coming in to figure out how to tax the product. What's the model? Is it a percentage of gross? Is it per square foot of canopy? As we were doing this from county to county was different, and You saw mass exoduses from Monterey County at one point in time, based on taxation, permitting, the oversight that comes from BCC, from CDFA, these letters that come sometimes, an email that comes the day before they're coming to your property to tell you
Right.
you're going to be there. It's like the most ominous looking thing ever. So what I'm getting at, and I know you know this, is when we overburden an industry, and this industry is not being treated because of its lack of federal legality. It, harvest can't be called a crop. It doesn't enjoy the same protections as corn or soybeans.
Mm.
In that being the case, we set up somewhat of an adversarial system. We've made it hard. We've overtaxed. We've overpermitted. We've done a lot of things in the regulatory side to ensure that cannabis, everybody will be following the rules. But in making it so onerous through time, attention, detail, money, taxation, it fuels the black market. And it makes it so the legal grower wants to participate in the black market. It makes it so that the person who has been doing this forever says, screw it. I don't want to do it that way. I'll take the risk. The fact is that the black market also knows that the amount of governmental oversight, police oversight for them is less now than it's ever been.
Right.
Because the job now is to monitor all the people that are doing it legally,
Right.
that are paying for all those services.
Right.
So it's an interesting, I want to say conundrum, but it's just an interesting way it's all been set up. And so for my purposes, the black market, I don't know that the black market ever goes away.
Mm.
Matter of fact, I like to call it the gray market, but I don't think it ever goes away. But I think the way to deal with it is to make the system a better system for the legal. And enforcement shouldn't be lording over the legal so much. It should be lording over the illegal. And that way, the tax base that the state, the local governments are looking for will be preserved. But if you continue to squeeze, like we talked about, the small, medium size out, continue to make the tax rate so onerous, it punishes the legal and it makes the black market more and more attractive all the time. And, listen, we're all creatures of habit. We all grew up in that system. So everybody has their buddy that grows and the places they go. Those people are still around. They didn't go anywhere.
Yep.
And I don't know that you can very much incentivize them to show up in the legal market, but you can certainly incentivize the legal market better by making this less onerous in every single way, because it's made to be so difficult.
Yeah. And a lot of people, predicted this, and, I've always been in favor of regulations, mainly because weed needs to be legal, period, and just the criminal justice component was one of the main reasons, why I went along with legalization. The Drug Policy Alliance endorsed Prop 64. We all knew it was an imperfect piece of legislation, but it was at least something to at least right that fundamental wrong that this plant should not be legal in the state of California. Ironing out all the specifics is really the challenge. And, I've been incredibly disappointed with the BCC. Lori Ajax has been a joke. I mean, I'll say this stuff. I've written novels to the Bureau to try to get them to understand the perspective of the small producer. And I sometimes get an empathetic ear. I get an empathetic ear with the Department of Public Health. They really seem to get it more so than the BCC. But the BCC was kind of set up, really, in my eyes, the BCC is a bunch of cops. Lori Ajax comes from, criminal justice. She's a cop. And that's how I feel like we are treated in the legal industry is if you're in the legal industry, you're treated like a criminal. Like that's how it feels. and you're held to this crazy standard of, and like, yeah, you're right, the regulators are going after people because their font size on the government warning was 5 instead of 6 point. And then you have people doing huge butane labs out in the desert blowing stuff up, and that barely gets any attention. But I think the fundamental flaw with Props 264 was, I remember going up to Sacramento, hearing from, I think you're probably at some of these hearings, I'd hear from all the politicians, and it seemed like they were all like, oh, once we have it regulated, people will flood to the regulated space because of testing and because of pesticides. And I remember thinking, well, yeah, I can see how that might make sense to somebody who's never smoked weed and isn't a part of the space. But there was never a public outcry about pesticides in cannabis. I never, ever, 20 years I've been growing weed and involved in the space. I never, ever heard of anyone over getting hurt from smoking pesticide laden weed. I'm sure there's cases out there. I'm not saying there isn't, but they're incredibly rare. There was not a public health crisis around pesticides in cannabis. What there was a governmental taxation crisis where they hated to see people making money untaxed. And I think they just thought, well, as soon as we legalize it, people will flood to the compliance space because they don't want to do something illegal, wrong. And then also because they're going to want safe lab tested flower. Well, also wrong, because people actually do kind of trust their local grower down the street. People kind of know that, hey, this guy's really into weed. He's smoking the weed that he's selling me. He's like a super stoner. He's not spraying it with pesticides, and maybe he is, but how harmful are they really? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about what chemicals get classified as organic and get listed under OMRI versus ones that that's a huge conversation piece. But like, how dangerous are these actual substances, and where's the public outcry or the public health concern around it? I don't think it was really there. So the way I see the legal space competing is we have to bring, in defense of the black market, what is it? 80% of California is, you cannot start a cannabis business, and 80% or so, maybe it's a little less now, of municipalities in California. So most people that want to enter the regulated space can't, because there's no licensing opportunity in their city or in their county. If they wanted to start a cannabis, they'd have to go to Coachella or somewhere where they do have a licensing structure, correct?
Sure. And they're also shut out from the process due to a lack of funds or lack of knowledge or lack of education.
Right.
I just want to add that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's this term, I've heard it before, but it's kind of stuck in my mind recently, access to institutional knowledge and institutional capital. That's where people that are versed in business and who are, and who went to, Princeton and Yale and have these connections can hyperscale brands because they know where they can get funding quickly and easily. They know the right people to bring in, to have on their board. I really want to see craft California cannabis succeed. It's like it's what I'm going to dedicate every ounce of energy that I have left in me to doing, is to try to see the craft California cannabis industry thrive, because I think it has to, for the quality of the products. I mean, I don't just want these huge mega corporations. I just saw Outco got bought out recently by a big Canadian brand. People are buying up these turnkey ready companies that that are vertical, and we're just going to get bland cannabis. Like, as a smoker, I don't want to see that happen, because I don't want to go to the pot store and there's only 5 choices. I don't want it to turn into that. I think it would be such a disservice, and we need that, craft passion for the plant that's going to produce these unique terpene profiles, because that's where the medicinal potential truly is we need as much diversity in the space. I always love the farmers market model. Like, we should just have big cannabis farmers markets all over the state where the growers can show up with their mason jars full of bud and sell it to people direct, just like it should be. In other words, I think cannabis should be treated as a food product. I couldn't think of coffee. I know you're a big coffee drinker. Coffee is just as psychoactive as cannabis. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I know that coffee gives me just as much of a psychoactive jolt as I get from smoking weed. I don't really think there's much. Coffee's probably even more harmful than cannabis. I mean, cannabis is just one of the least toxic, least harmful plants on the planet. But because it gives you that head change, It makes you kind of start to dream a little bit. Music sounds a little richer, the colors are a little brighter. For some reason, Western capitalism is very threatened by this plant, and why that is, who the fuck knows? But we seem
Well,
to be incredibly threatened. If you have a theory on that, I'd love to hear it.
sure, I have a theory on it. It's the same theory I have on lots of things that are expansive for us. Look, I mean, cannabis in the 50s, got slammed by the movie Reefer Madness, right? Which, oh, you're going to go crazy if you smoke weed, right?
Right.
Governments tested this. You can see the old studies. They also tested all kinds of psychedelics, you name it. The issue then is that, hey, where'd that movie come from? Came from tobacco, it came from alcohol, it came from timber, it came from textiles, it came from pharmaceutical companies. They're threatened by it from the capitalism side.
Right.
The country, the world has been threatened by anything, whether it be cannabis or psilocybin, LSD, or whatever it is. They're threatened by the awareness, the awakening of people. All the company, all the capitalists, all those different areas that I mentioned, they're threatened by that same awakening. Because if we started to move away from the use of opioids by using cannabis instead of, I don't know, Valium or Xanax or any pain, oxycodone, oxycontin, what happens? And what happens as we start to expand ourselves and we start to clear our minds, that we start to see things differently, that we don't attach to the same things, that we're not affected by marketing and all the sort of cultural paradigms that are thrown at us as to who we're supposed to be and when we're supposed to be that. And as soon as big business, government believes that we're threatened by those things, they're going to do everything they can to hold it down, to tamp it down, either to totally knock it out, which they did, or to open it up, but only allow to a certain level. We can hold this down right now, which is why we haven't seen the federal, we're not legal federally right now. And so you sort of have an industry that's been let out, but not really.
Right.
Right. And so look, the world is afraid of awakening. In my belief that lots of things show up for us that to sort of tamp that down. COVID was one of those things in my mind. And I'm not saying it was released by someone, but COVID came in a time where I was feeling the world starting to awaken.
Right.
We went through a political time frame where that also happened. And we saw some things happening and people go, whoa, no. And then we saw other people come out of the woodwork, first time storm the Capitol. Like, what? And what you started to see from that is all these movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter or other things, this awakening starting to happen. And I think throughout history, our country or throughout history, you see these different events that take place whereby society, government, big business believes it's threatened. And this industry threatens that in so many ways. It threatens the medical insurance industry. Yep. It threatens pharmaceuticals, tobacco, you name it.
And I think what cannabis does is it actually brings people together. Conservatives love cannabis, so do liberals. It's literally like probably the one thing Americans can agree on. Americans overwhelmingly believe in medical marijuana now. Even a majority of Republicans want fully legalized cannabis now, over 51%. I believe cannabis is something that actually can unite us. And that is a huge threat to the media that makes a ton of money off of dividing us. And the media is, you know me, I'm no big Trump supporter, but I do agree with an occasional thing that came out of his mouth. And I do think the media is a big problem in this country. We have, 5 companies that really control all media. They do I call it the division industry. right? You know, you got your Fox News and your Rush Limbaugh and your Alex Jones and kind of these outlets. And then you got your liberal equivalents and MSNBC and the Young Turks. And as long as they can keep everybody in their lane, and then they can target market to those people and play up their fears and keep everyone really afraid, very small, afraid of your neighbor, afraid that someone else might have a different opinion than you. When did people become so afraid of having a debate about something? You know, that,
Well, they did because they cultivate their social media feed to play the algorithm loop back to them.
right.
And so to me, I don't believe that there's nothing that I've ever heard from the Orange Man that resonates with me. By the way, so you and I totally
I
are
try to
different in that.
find I try to find optimism in everything.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But media certainly is a problem. But media to me, worse for most of us, I believe it's very transparent. I know what I'm getting when I turn the TV on, the Fox or MSNBC or CNN. I get it. So I cultivate my news from different sources. Right? I'm going to go to BBC America. I'm going to go to Al Jazeera. I'm going
Right.
to go to places that I think NPR because that's my vent. That's where I go. But the reality of the situation is that it's up to us to educate ourselves. We have
Yep.
to get out of that loop. But I mean, you hit me up today on LinkedIn, and you'll notice where my profile goes. I don't share a ton on there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not on any other social media outlet. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not on
Yeah, I
Facebook.
noticed that.
I've never been on Facebook, never
Mm-hmm.
been on Instagram, never had Twitter, never had Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, for me, it's not where I want to spend my time.
Sure.
And what I do understand, I saw that great movie, I forget what it was called, but um, it's just feeding you back your own shit.
Yeah.
So great. So when you say, hey, whatever happened to discourse, whatever happened to dialogue, whatever happened to civics,
Mm-hmm.
where we can sit down at a table and even though we have two diametric opinions, sit down and somehow get to a place to agree or be equally unhappy when we walk away from the table.
Right. Right.
Hey, what do we need to do here? And that is missing. And you're right, media, social media, all these things, what it does is it polarizes us, pulls us to one side or the other. So we no longer are centrists. And every politician does this, or at least most. They talk their game and then they get in office and then they come back to the middle
Mm-hmm.
because that's where
Mm-hmm.
that's where
Sure.
popular opinion is and public opinion is.
Right.
But the problem is that we have turned everybody is now a zealot. You
Yeah.
either believe in wearing a mask or you don't.
Right.
You're either when is it that flying the American flag now became a conservative thing and a Republican thing, right? Like what? Like you now see somebody wearing a red, white, and blue mask, you probably assume they're a conservative.
Right.
I don't understand any of that. And
Yeah.
until we stop separating ourselves as human beings from one another, like you said, cannabis brings people together. Till we stop separating ourselves and we start to believe that we're all one, that we are part of this universe and it's part of us, that's where we struggle. We're going to
Yep.
continue to struggle.
And you also said, you moved to California for a connection to the earth. And I think that's also what cannabis does. Not only does it reconnect us, I think, to ourselves, to each other, but most importantly, probably back to the earth. And I think, we've co-evolved with cannabis for, I think, forever. I mean, I think is the minute whenever Homo sapiens, kind of became what we are, we invented fire, we started socializing, we've had cannabis for sure, probably even before fire. We were probably eating it. It's a beautiful plant. It smells good. I'm sure we were very intrigued by it back in caveman days. But I think it's just been an ally to humanity, an ally to storytelling. Do you know Terence McKenna? The
Sure.
So he has this great talk. He gave it at Esalen years ago in Big Sur about his theory that magic mushrooms actually led to the expanse of really human consciousness, because the African plains, when they were kind of going from rainforest to what they are now, which are kind of these open plains, you had the emergence of psilocybin mushrooms, and humans were eating. If the thing about mushrooms, I imagine you've done some mushrooms, but for people that haven't, if you take a small amount of mushrooms, a microdose, you don't get that shamanistic divine like experience. What you do get is enhanced edge detection. So if you're a human on a field and you're trying to see predators, having that subtle edge detection could be a major advantage to staying alive on the African plains. So Terence McKenna's theory was humans were eating a little bit of mushroom for basically as a performance enhancing food source to help them stay alive and see predators. But then, of course, as we started socializing, we started eating it, we started to figure out like, hey, if I eat a few more of these, actually, the wheels start turning, and suddenly human consciousness and storytelling and awareness of body and self and spirit basically kind of took root because of mushrooms. I think it's a fascinating theory. I don't know if we'll ever be able to prove it right or wrong, but I think just like mushrooms, I think cannabis has probably played a huge part of that because, like, what's green shock strain that they, purple candy cane, right? The real name for that is storyteller, right? And it's true, when you smoke that flower, you start, to use the Hawaiian term, you start talking story. People that are closed in, and I love that word expansive because that's what cannabis is for me. I can feel so locked in, and I smoke a little bit of flower, and suddenly my whole world, suddenly, like, nature starts calling to me. Suddenly I want to write a song. I want to participate. We can have two people on camera if you want.
Oh, can you? Here.
Sure.
Oh,
We're all
no, it's
inclusive
okay.
here. We're talking about expansiveness, so it'd be totally appropriate. But I think there's just something that the human species needs from cannabis. It's vital to our existence on this planet. Here's a theory for you if you want to get into some crazy stuff. I think humans came from the Andromeda system and the Sirius system and brought cannabis with us on our spaceship a long time ago. It was one of the sacred plants. You know how they're doing tissue culture samples now, where you can
Sure.
have a sterile test tube and actually keep genetics alive. You could cryo freeze those and take them on a space shuttle and transport tons of seed stock and clone stock extra, intergalactically. So that's one of my far out theories that I think about when I'm super high, is that I think this plant has been with us even for longer than human history. It's too perfect for the human system. We have our endocannabinoid system. We produce these natural endocannabinoids. The cannabis plant interacts with that system so perfectly. It just seems like it's God's gift, to us here on Earth.
Is that why you said in your other podcast that you believe it's an
Yeah.
alien
Well, that
plant?
was
Is
kind of like a play on
that
words, a little bit of clickbait, but I really do want, like, I would love to, my dream on my podcast is to find somebody that agrees with me. That's why I'm going to keep saying this theory until I finally get an email from somebody that's like, I have evidence this is true. And I'll invite them on.
that's good. You'll definitely be able to do podcast 8 because I have no evidence for you.
I'm still going to keep searching. My real dream, Lauren, is to be the Anthony Bourdain of weed. I want to travel around the world and smoke weed with people. I want to go to Pakistan. I want to go to like the kind of meccas of cannabis. I want to go to Cambodia and Vietnam and explore all those Southeast Asian varietals that there are genetics that are locked up in the mountains of Afghanistan. And unfortunately that area is so war torn, it'd be really hard to do it now. But you have places on earth that are the probably the birthplace of cannabis. I mean, as far as we know, we think that cannabis, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I know, we believe cannabis came from the Hindu Kush mountain region that goes through Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. That's its original home. And it might have had another home in Latin America or Southeast Asia. We're not sure, but we kind of think through the genetic genome testing that we're doing now on the plant that the oldest species of cannabis are kind of those old Afghan, Hindu Kush, which would explain why OG Kush and those strains are so potent. You can clone them over and over and over because they've been on the planet for 10 million, 20 million years. Like, they know who they are. Their genetic integrity is very strong.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my dream, is to be able to travel around the world and go to these places and really, see how cannabis is used and appreciated by different cultures. And the Far East is a much more hashish based culture. The West is a much more alcohol culture. And I'm trying to get away from alcohol, on my own. Like, my dad was an alcoholic. I have alcoholism in my family. And I would much rather be smoking cannabis than drinking. It's night and day. Like, if I drink the night before, like if I drank last night, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be asleep. It just knocks me out. Cannabis, I can smoke all day long. Um, And I feel generally pretty good. It awakens my body. I like to smoke weed and go for a run. I love high running, high yoga, high surfing. Pretty much cannabis like amplifies anything that you're doing.
Mhm.
Meditation, it just deepens that experience. I don't know many other substances that really do that. I mean, I think the psychedelics and the right microdose have some of those
Mhm.
parallels, but I don't know many substances that you can use when you're sick, when you're happy, when you're sad. And it always seems to take you to a better place than where you started. And sometimes like with an edible, it might take you to a little bit of a scary place, but those are usually learning and healing opportunities. I want to pick your brain a little bit because I know you have this wealth of knowledge about the law and business. And if people have questions too, if anybody has questions for Lorne, he's really knows his shit. And if anybody is struggling with getting your brand started, email me and I'll put you in touch. But something I know you have this other side to you, and maybe you don't want to talk about it too much, but I know that cannabis and kind of this lifestyle has been a big part of healing for you, and it has for me too. And I think we all come to cannabis for kind of that self-healing and that expansiveness and connection to what is true and what is real. And I think that's the big issue with the world right now is we all have these phones and we all have this digital interface to the world, and we are all getting sick from it. Literally, I think we're all undergoing a massive mental health crisis simultaneously, all at the same time. I don't think we've ever had an addiction like to this that we're all suffering from to varying degrees simultaneously. I mean, I think it's a major issue, and I think cannabis is going to be one of the tools in our medicine box that we're going to use to save us from ourselves, to get us out of this digital vortex where the powers that be are going to try to simplify, because if they can get us all just into this digital lane, then they can market and sell to us anything they want, and they can control our every whim. They don't need to plant a microchip in us. They've already done it with the phone. Like, they've already won. The more people can get off of this and go out into the earth to get your hands in the soil, to eat the plants right off of the tree, to communicate with your fellow human about real shit. It's like, I just want to talk to people about real shit that's going on. Like, I want to hear how people are really doing, not what their social media profile looks like. And I love that you don't have a social media profile. One of my friends, the smartest guy I know, he's a lawyer, aced his SATs, never started a social media profile ever, still doesn't have one. And he's probably one of those content people I know. Doesn't miss it. No Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, spends zero energy on all that stuff, and is happier because of it. And I think, I don't want to like be a doomsdayer. I am pretty positive, but I think this is a major problem that we're all going to have to deal with collectively and bring everybody back down to earth, you know, and that's why we need the older folks. I know you work a lot with seniors. I was reading your LinkedIn, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in the older crowd. And I mean, like the people that like fought World War II, like, the old school OGs of the world.
Mhm.
We need them right now to instill some wisdom onto the younger generation that is totally wrapped up in this. And the young people are cool. I'm not saying they're not. I'm 40. I'm kind of like this elder millennial guy that, like, I still remember life before the internet, and life was good before the internet. Like, now it seems impossible to exist without GPS and texting, but it wasn't that bad. Like, like, I went outside and played with my friends. I didn't, I played Nintendo and stuff, but I spent a great deal of my childhood outdoors. And I grew up in Oregon, so maybe it was a little easier. I'm just worried about the future, with these devices. And I think we're going to see a mass exodus from the digital space. And I think we're going to see more and more people like you that left, a way of life to pursue something with a deeper connection to self, to spirit, to earth. And I think cannabis will be a huge vehicle to help people break the spell that they're under from Mark Zuckerberg and his data crunching algorithms to figure out what your next breath is going to be. I don't think people want that. I think that's where a lot of this tension is coming from. Is people know they're being manipulated on a massive scale. They want to escape. They don't know how to do it. So they're going down rabbit holes on the internet looking for some breath of truth, looking for somebody to say, hey, I see you, I hear you, I know you're struggling, and we're gonna get out of this together. And that's what I just want my voice to be a part of that movement, to say, hey, let's talk about this stuff. Let's figure out a way to build society that can work for everybody. And I really believe cannabis is the way to do that. I think the more we can get people into this industry, you don't even have to smoke weed to be able to enjoy it. Grow it, use it topically. There's a lot of ways to use it that don't get you high, but support the liberation of this plant, because just the industrial, and I want to talk to you about industrial hemp a little bit and just kind of get your thoughts on that, because I think that the industrial hemp component of cannabis is just as huge as the medicinal psychoactive part. I don't know a lot about it. I've brought a few people on the show that know more than I do, but I think industrial hemp is going to be our solution to fossil fuels, to building materials. It's the fastest growing plant on land. Do you work with any hemp companies? Are you invested at all on that side? Or are you pretty much strictly on the THC?
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Do you think do I sound crazy thinking that the industrial hemp is just as big? Do you see that side of it, at least just in your view, being vitally important to reshaping our economy in the way that, we move forward as a country? I mean, do you think hemp will be as big as people are? I know you hear all the chatter. I'm just
I
curious
mean,
what
I,
your
I
opinion
mean,
is.
look. I would hope so. I would hope so. If we're smart, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You know, not to be not not to be a negative Nelly, but being smart is not enough.
Right.
And there has to be a shift away from things that we're used to,
Yeah.
that we're told is the way. Like bamboo goes the same way, right? Because bamboo, hemp, you cut down the field and it grows right back, right? It doesn't take
Right.
20 years to grow back the same trees to make paper pulp, right? You can make it out of hemp. Clothing, flooring, building materials. I mean, as you know plenty about it. There's so many applications. The question is do the different lobbies continue to smash it down? Textile industry, timber industry. I'm sure we can name a ton of other industries. It's no different than the same fight that cannabis is
Right.
at, because it is the same fight, and uh, unfortunately, we still carry around, as you said. I think we're at a point right now that we're maybe 70% of all counties in California are still dry counties for cannabis. You know, what are we doing? And can we properly regulate an industry and continue to prop it up so that it doesn't get hammered through taxation and permitting and everything else, and regulations? Are we interested in doing that? And I think the people are.
Mhm.
You are. I am. We want those options. We want those things in front of us. We want to be able to take advantage of this plant. The question is, will we be allowed to? Will this take place? And that, I imagine, that depends on what you believe
Right.
actually happens. My belief is that big business and government are too intertwined,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because of that, we can't make these decisions without the governmental regulation and you know being impacted
Mhm.
dramatically, because there's too much money thrown at it. The old way of doing it always wins, and like we talk about, there's an awakening. That awakening is about, oh, what, this this plant can do these things, and it costs a tenth of the amount of money, and what, it's sustainable, and yet how long has it taken us just to get cannabis legal
Right.
at the stateside, and still it's a shit show.
Yep. Yep. It can seem a little depressing when you think about that. It's like, I think about it all the time. It's like, I can't believe we're 2021, like, and cannabis is still illegal. Like, we've known for a long time that it's non-toxic. No one's ever overdosed on it. It's virtually, there's really no good reason for it to still be illegal other than money. Like Snoop Dogg says, if it doesn't make sense, follow the money. And there's obviously some people that benefit from the status quo. Um, but I think that there's so much great entrepreneurship happening in the space, even though the state has squashed a lot of it down. I think we're pretty resilient people, and the people that you work with, I think are dumb enough to, are smart enough to be dumb enough to just know that if they continue to pursue their craft and cancel out all the noise and just stay true to their vision and stay in their lane, that eventually the opportunity will come. That eventually, and I believe that the consumer ultimately has the power, to decide what products they want to buy, where they want to spend their money. And I think that the products offered by the small grower are superior. So if we can just get them out in front of people at a competitive price point, packaged in a way that's attractive, that'll sit on the shelf nicely, they got a chance. But that's not enough, as you know, because a lot of brands can do that. They can put some really great flower in a jar, put it in a cute box, but that's only a quarter of the battle, maybe even less than that. Then the distribution, the sell through plan, the marketing, the supply chain relationships, the communication. That's where people are getting hung up. I know a lot of people that can get incredible flower into a jar in a cute box, but that's as far as they can get. What's your advice to those people? How do they get from they have a great product? How do they get to the next step?
It comes through a network of really good partnerships. Look, if you're fortunate enough to be financially sound and you can have multiple licenses, if you can have a distribution license and a cultivation license and a retail license, and manufacturing license, if you can be vertically integrated, obviously that's the key. But that takes lots of effort. It takes lots of time. It takes lots of money. It takes lots of day-to-day operations. And so that's very difficult for your small and mediums. So your small and mediums need to plug into good resources. Look, consultants one of them, obviously, attorneys one of them, a good CPA
Mm-hmm.
in this space is one. But you need to have a network of people around you, whether it's from the insurance industry or security or soil, whatever it is. You've got to have that down. You've got to continue to look at that model as to how to most efficiently partner with folks. What I see from the small and mediums is that this industry more so, but also like other industries, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 of these relationships don't work out.
Mm-hmm.
That somebody will tell you, "Hey, I'm going to do this for you, and we're going to do this," and go 6 months down the line, and we're like, you know, like you said, super talker,
Yeah.
and those can be people within the industry. And so, really, it's about small medium needs to find somebody who says, "Hey, we're a distributor. We want to work with you. Here, let's work on the parameters of what the deal looks like." Sticks to it, continues to send you the monthly sales figures. Um, you know, understands, works with you hand in hand, weekly meetings, whatever it is, and continue to connect and set the community up for yourself to be successful. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take going to the shows. It's going to take winning the awards. It's going to take having a website and keeping it up to date. And it's going to have to take a team of people that are dedicated to this without the reality is without getting paid lots of times.
Right. Right.
And listen,
That's the tough
as
part.
a consultant, it's no different for me at times too, because I want to work with people and I can't, it can't be, it's not the regular legal billing that you have with a client. There's things that you do and ways you show up that when you really recognize that people around you, how hardworking they are and how deserving they are and how they're struggling, you allow yourself to struggle with them a little bit. I've always been okay with that because my connection is to the people, and that's really what we have to continue to do. Is we have to continue to forge those relationships with people that care, that just aren't about the bottom line all the time, but are really looking to do something. And listen, I think one of the things that you've been saying about big business is, this reminds me of the beer industry,
Mm-hmm.
and that we got to a point where there were the monsters, the Coorses and the Anheuser-Busches, and everybody knew Miller and Bud Light. And then all of a sudden, the craft beer industry sprung up.
Right.
And now you can go to your local pub, your local brewery, and not only have a beer there, they'll can it for you, or they'll put it in a crowler or a growler. And to me, that's where this industry goes, especially for the small mediums.
Right. And that, my understanding, and a lot of people say, hey, if you want to know where cannabis is headed, look at the beer industry. I hear that all the time. And so I have a little bit. And my if you Wikipedia craft beer, it basically will say in California, Sierra Nevada out of Chico really is kind of like the one that really scaled from the garage to national distribution, global distribution now. But it was legislation in the 70s that allowed the craft movement to happen. It wasn't like people just all of a sudden one day were like, hey, I should start a craft brewery. It was legislation that allowed the craft industry to thrive. So a lot of people are saying, watch out, guys, because this is what they did in alcohol. They overregulated it. So only, 5 companies can survive. Then once they know they've really got it down, where big business and big government have colluded to that means, then they open it up a little bit and they say, okay, now we can allow the craft beer industry. Now, from my understanding, craft beer represents like less than 5% of beer sales. So as big as craft, and I don't know if that's true, somebody can fact check me, but I think that's pretty close. It might seem like in California, when you go to, I go to like the health food stores around here, and it's mostly craft beer. That craft beer is like this huge thing, and it is a big business. 5% alcohol beer sales is a lot, but it's still tiny compared to Anheuser-Busch and Coors. And like that's okay if that's the reality, right? Like we're going to have Walmart, we're going to have Budweiser, we're going to have those brands in cannabis, but how big of a slice of the pie is left for the people that actually built the industry, for the small farmers that literally risked going to jail for life? Think about the sacrifice that people made to get to where we're at right now. I don't want those people to be forgotten.
Sure. Well, listen, nor do they. And what they see happening is or the folks that are that have passed, they're rolling over with this stuff. They're rolling over in their grave, because you're right. I mean, it could go the way of the craft brewing industry, but federally, no. We're still hamstrung in so many ways.
Yeah.
Here we are in California with 70% dry in counties. The state that basically grows the best cannabis and has for forever. So it really is going to take an opening up, a trusting. And that's one of my big issues, is that as these regulations have been formed, as these laws have been passed, as these taxation levels have been set, why haven't we done as good a job as we can of listening to the people in the industry for their expertise in something that people in government don't know? That are coming from prosecutorial backgrounds, or coming from alcohol, or coming from wherever, be shifted from a different department to then review applications, or to and so for me, that's one of the big disconnects, and there has to be a trust here. But see, we're basing this system on something that's always been shady. So it's hard for people to have that. It's not what we have most of the time. There's that level of trust doesn't happen. And so if we can work together, we can figure this stuff out so that the industry survives. I mean, otherwise it will go the way of Marlboro Lights, Marlboro Reds, that type of stuff. And it's not, my hope, and I think this is where Canada got jacked for a while, in sort of this slow progress, and the investment in grow space was unbelievable. And these huge companies came out of the gate roaring to just go and come right
Right.
back down to earth.
Right.
And, you know,
And yeah, no, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Everyone was like canopy, right? It was all about, we have so much canopy, and it's like cool. What are you gonna do with all that flower? Who's gonna
sure.
buy it? Just because you're growing it. And I think that speaks to branding, really, and in genetics and the importance of that. In American capitalism, people trust brands more than they trust government. That's for sure. We kind of in America, we kind of hold brands up to almost this like divine like power. It's like Coca-Cola, Nike, like these entities are almost beyond human, if that makes sense. And I think it's because we feel like brands are held accountable to the public, right? I mean, we all feel like we participate in what brands make it as shareholders or just as consumers. If you go out and you buy a product, you are essentially giving them your endorsement. And I think people kind of like that. So I think the best way to shift people's minds is through good branding and good genetics. And kind of the last kind of thing I want to leave you with, or leave the people listening with, is we've talked a lot about how to get to the next step, and I agree. What you're saying really is you need to network. You need to build your network. So probably the best networking tool I've had in my life has been the Emerald Cup. It's why you and I are talking, because I met Green Shock at the Emerald Cup. I've done well at the Emerald Cup over the years. I've made a lot of relationships there. Are there any other organizations that you can rattle off for people? Is there an alliance if they want to get deeper into the industry? Should they join a group? Can you point people in the right direction?
Look, depending on where you are, you've got the alliances in Mendocino,
Hmm.
you've got CCIA in California, you got NCIA nationally, you got the Drug Policy Alliance,
Right.
you've got the Drug Policy Alliance. You have, look, when we were in Yolo County, we started the Yolo County Cannabis Coalition,
Hmm.
YCC, and we wrote white papers and we really influenced. But I think that, look, COVID has taken a lot of that away, right? And your your cannabis people at the small medium level, they're not your email people and website people. They're
Sure.
not your social media people.
Hmm.
In rare cases, like with the Mendo Dope guys, yeah, they have that. But overall, this has sort of, once it began, sort of been a stutter step in that
Hmm.
connection. And I think people need to continue to get back out. Look, the Emerald Cup was done, online this year, so we're not back at that. Festivals aren't back. I think as we start to get back to some of these things, start to get back to community, and that's where it all begins and ends. So right now, you have to make a bigger effort, a larger effort to do that, and most of that's going to happen online. It's also hard when you're cultivation just distributor retailer to now get FaceTime with the retailers, right? You can't
Right.
go in anymore, and we have to get back to that, and we will get back to that. And I think that that's where it always is. I know that Green Chuck's getting ready to do a farmer's market. That's going to happen. Licensed through distributor, and everybody will show up. That's going to be an amazing event. And every time those events take place, you're right. Here come the connections. Oh my gosh, this is outdoor flower. Wow. And I really want to, I'm making this over here and I'd like to use your flower. And here we go. And that's something that we also need is we need, an online marketplace. We need ways to continue to connect. And like I say, let's continue to prop each other up. We can compete. That's fine. But let's do so in the spirit of the plant and doing something good. And the people that really understand the entourage effect of CBD and terpenes and THC and aren't just looking to produce a 35% THC strain. Let's work together.
Hmm.
Let's
Hmm.
put together groups to support each other to move this plant forward in the way that we want instead of the way that we're being told or we're being forced to. And that's going to happen through connection. And the strength will be in bringing these groups together to work to work towards that goal, not sort of tripping over each other. And I see a lot of that, and I'm buoyed by that. I love that. And I do see that, and that's where we need to work together, whether you're a consultant or attorney or CPA, to really plug into that space instead of these big monsters, these big behemoths that are looking to put out, your next box of Kleenex.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I think, there's a lot of challenges. This is going to be a bumpy road, and it probably will be for a long time. And never underestimate the stupidity of the U.S. government on drug policy. So I don't see cannabis getting fast-tracked to legalization in the next year or two. I think it's going to be a long, arduous struggle, and they're going to kind of just very slowly. The Banking Act, I think, will be a big step. If we can get that pushed through, that's going to be a game changer. Decriminalization. We don't have to have our legal recreational market federally just yet, but can we at least just decriminalize it so people stop going to jail for having a joint in Arkansas? That's the big one for me, is like, we need to stop that immediately. People should not be going to jail for having less than a gram of, and this is still happening. I don't think a lot of people in California might not understand that people are still going to jail in this country for having a joint on them. That needs to change immediately. So anything we can do collectively to, I think the cannabis industry, we can get so hyper focused on, my brand, and, I'm trying to win the Emerald Cup. But I think also kind of keeping, reaching out to the people all over the country. Oklahoma is doing some really cool stuff in the cannabis space. I can't wait for Texas to legal. Let's see what the Lone Star State does with cannabis. I can't wait to see how Texas manages, with their approach to business that they have. I think it could be great. It'd be the polar opposite of California. I would consider moving to Texas if they did it right. If kind of like Oklahoma, no cap on licenses, right? I think that's what's going on there. Great. Bring everybody in. Let's see what we can really do. We don't need to have this giant behemoth bureaucracy. The cannabis industry has done a really good job of self-regulating. I was always impressed at how well the space self-regulated. It was like, if 1 year trimmers were only making 200 a pound instead of 250, it was like everybody kind of shifted together. And the trimmers, it's like there weren't labor unions or anything, but there was communication between the groups of trimmers and the growers going, hey, we can't work for less than 200, and you're going to need to give us a meal a day. And there was kind of like things and I'm not saying people weren't being taken advantage of. And anybody that's watched, what's that movie on Netflix, about all the murders and the sex trafficking going on, Murder Mountain.
Murder Mountain, yeah.
Yeah, sure. That there is that going on too. It's a tiny slice of what's happening. Most of the time, people in the space are good people, and I think in care, usually people get into cannabis not because they're, it's a little different than some other illicit industries. I'll just put it that way. But cannabis does attract typically pretty good people that care about each other and in the earth, and that gives me a lot of hope. But Lorne, it's been great having you on, man. I'd love to have you back. I know I tried to tempt you into some really good conspiracy talk, but I'll have to get you next time, maybe when you're back in California, and we can maybe we can do this in person. I'm going to get the podcast studio set up so that I can have a little more of an interactive experience. We can smoke together. We can drink some good coffee. So I'd love to have you back on, and I'm going to make sure. How can people find you? If somebody out there that's listening, that's like, I really need to talk to a good consultant, I want to get my business. How can people find you?
My website is www.integratecal.com. You can also just Google my name, Lorne, Lorne Silverstein, and I'll come up. My phone number is 530-219-3336. It's a big billboard flashing right now. But listen, and anybody who does contact me, please recognize I'll talk to you, and I'm happy to share information with you. I really, this is about connection for me, connection to the earth, connection to the planet, connection to people, and doing good things for good people. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to carve out a space to work with wonderful people.
Thanks for joining me today on Head Change, the podcast that puts you in a better headspace. I've been your host, Levi Strom. Full transcripts of today's episode are available on our blog at awakenedeveryday.com. If you'd like to listen to more podcasts like this, you can join the conversation on Anchor FM and YouTube. Until next time, peace.